tapestry of life, threads of joy and sorrow are inextricably woven. For Sarah and David Miller, their tapestry had been brutally torn. The tragic loss of their young daughter Lily to a sudden illness had left in gaping wound in their souls a silence that echoed louder than any scream. They sought an escape, a place where they could mend, rebuild, and perhaps finally breathe again. That place was Willow Creek Farmhouse, an isolated Victorian gem nestled deep in the upstate New York countryside. It was old, built in the late 1800s with charming gables and a wraparound porch. The price was suspiciously low, a detail David, ever the optimist, attributed to its remote location. Sarah, haunted by her grief, simply craved the quiet. They bought it, hoping for a new beginning, unaware they were walking into an ancient, waiting nightmare. Asterisk from the moment they moved in, a subtle unease settled upon the house. It began small, unexplained cold drafts in rooms with no open windows, faint whispers that sounded like a child's laughter just beyond earshot. Sarah, overwhelmed by grief, attributed these to her own mind playing tricks, a cruel echo of her lost daughter. David, trying to be strong for both of them, dismissed them as old house sounds. But the house had an insidious way of preying on their fragile emotions. Objects would move. Lily's favorite teddy bear would appear in Sarah's bed, even after she put it away. Doors would lock and unlock on their own. The old grandfather clock in the hall, which hadn't worked in decades, began to chime precisely at 3 a.m., the exact hour Lily had passed away. Asterisk, the atmosphere grew heavier, colder. Arguments between Sarah and David, rare before, became frequent and vitriolic. The house seemed to amplify their pain, twisting their words, turning their shared grief into mutual accusation. Sarah felt a crushing weight whenever she was alone, a feeling of eyes watching her from every shadow. David started having terrifying night terrors, waking in a cold sweat, convinced he heard a woman screaming from within the walls. The true horror of part 1 culminates when Sarah, searching for a misplaced item, discovers a hidden room in the dusty attic, a small, windowless space with children's drawings plastered on the walls. Drawings not of happy kids, but of grotesque figures with empty eyes. The shadow man standing over a bed, and always a recurring motif, a pair of large, dark, mirthful eyes staring out from the walls. As she examined the drawings, a chilling, disembodied whisper caressed her ear, speaking in a voice that was both a child's and something ancient, insidious. She wants her playtime. She wants her new mommy, Sarah screams, dropping her flashlight as the attic door slams shut, plunging her into absolute darkness, surrounded by the echoes of forgotten children's fears. Asterisk, Willow Creek Farmhouse was no longer a refuge. It was a cage. The benevolent facade had crumbled, revealing a malevolent intelligence that meticulously orchestrated the descent into madness for Sarah and David Miller. To rescuing Sarah from the attic, a process that felt impossibly long and arduous. As if the house itself resisted his efforts, the couple was a fractured mess. Their arguments intensified, fueled by paranoia and exhaustion. Sarah became convinced that David was deliberately hiding things from her, that he was somehow in on it. David believed Sarah was succumbing to her grief, imagining things. The house was successfully dividing them, weakening their bond, making them vulnerable. Asterisk, David, desperate for answers, began to research the farmhouse's history. He found old town records, newspaper clippings, a chilling pattern. Every family that had lived in Willow Creek Farmhouse since the late 1800s had met a tragic end: disappearances, unexplained illnesses, and most disturbingly, children driven to madness or found dead in their beds. Always at the exact hour Lily had passed away. He found a single recurring detail in old police reports, a mention of disturbing, deep gouges in the walls, as if something with claws tried to get out. Meanwhile, Sarah experienced a terrifying escalation of phenomena. She would see fleeting glimpses of a gaunt, sorrowful woman in old-fashioned clothing, standing silently in the shadows. This woman never spoke, but her eyes, those dark, mournful eyes from the children's drawings, conveyed an unbearable pain, a plea for help. Sarah realized the woman wasn't the monster. She was a victim, trapped, tormented, and desperate to escape. Asterisk, the house began to manifest its power physically. The sounds of a child's laughter, once faint, now echoed loudly through the empty rooms, mocking Sarah's grief. Objects would fly across the room, narrowly missing David. One night, the entire house seemed to groan and shift, emitting a deep, guttural moan that vibrated through their bones, making the very walls feel alive. The true horror of Part 2 peaks when David, trying to repair a mysteriously broken window, discovers a hidden compartment behind a loose brick in the fireplace. Inside, he finds a child's antique doll, its eyes gouged out, and a small leather-bound diary. The diary belonged to a previous resident, a woman named Eleanor Vance, whose own daughter had mysteriously vanished in the house in 1923. Eleanor's frantic, desperate entries detailed her growing conviction that the house itself was eating her child. It had a hunger for young, innocent souls. Her final entry, scrawled in a shaky hand, simply read, "The walls whisper, they want my child. They are building something. It watches from within the wood." Asterisk as David reads these words, a cold, skeletal hand grips his shoulder from behind. He drops the diary. The lights flicker out, plunging the entire house into absolute darkness. He hears a child's giggle right next to his ear, followed by the familiar, mournful eyes appearing in the darkness, glowing faintly. As Part 2 ends with David's blood-curdling scream, Asterisk Willow Creek Farmhouse revealed its true, monstrous purpose in its final act. It wasn't merely haunted by a malevolent spirit. It was the malevolent spirit, parasitic entity that had woven itself into the very fabric of the house, feeding on grief, despair, and the innocence of children. David, now convinced that the house was a living predator, desperately searched for Sarah. The house actively tried to prevent them from reuniting, creating phantom walls, shifting rooms, and amplifying their deepest fears. He saw vivid, disturbing visions of Lily alive and smiling, then instantaneously morphing into a decaying skeletal figure, beckoning him into the darkness. Asterisk Sarah, meanwhile, found herself drawn to the old master bedroom, the room where previous children had vanished. There she finally saw the entity in its truest form. It wasn't a ghost. It was a grotesque, amorphous mass of shadows and sorrow, constantly shifting, its surface rippling with the faces of tormented children, faces that twisted and contorted, calling for their mommy, and amidst them, a single sorrowful face, the ghost of Eleanor Vance, her eyes wide with terror, silently pleading for Sarah to break the cycle. Sarah understood then. The shadow man, the mournful eyes, the lullaby, these were all projections, lures designed to draw children into its embrace, to consume their innocence, and to sustain its unnatural existence. The house itself was a cradle of despair, meticulously constructed to be the perfect trap for grieving families, especially those who had lost a child. It wasn't just a physical structure. It was a living, breathing, hunger-driven organism. Asterisk in a desperate final attempt, David found Sarah in the master bedroom, but it was too late. The entity had begun to consume her. Her skin was turning pale, almost translucent, her eyes taking on that familiar, vacant stare. The entity, now bolder, attacked David directly, manifesting as a crushing, invisible weight that pressed him to the floor, whispering promises of eternal reunion with Lily if he would only surrender. But David, fueled by a renewed love for Sarah and a burning hatred for the monstrous entity, fought back. He grabbed a forgotten crucifix from a bedside table, a relic from an earlier, more superstitious owner, and plunged it into the pulsating darkness of the entity. The house screamed. Not a human scream, but a sound of raw, ancient agony like cracking timber and tearing flesh. The walls shuddered, then began to bleed a thick, black ichor. Asterisk. The house began to violently tear itself apart, convulsing as if in its death throes. David, barely conscious, dragged Sarah's limp body out of the collapsing master bedroom and stumbled towards the front door. He made it outside just as the entire Willow Creek farmhouse exploded inward, collapsing into a heap of shattered timber, dust, and a pervasive, sickly sweet scent of decay. He looked at Sarah, her eyes slowly opened, their vacant stare replaced by a flicker of recognition. She was alive, but as David held her, he noticed something horrifying on her inner wrist. Where the entity had touched her, a single, familiar mark had appeared, a tiny, perfectly formed pair of dark, mournful eyes. Asterisk Willow Creek farmhouse is gone, reduced to ash and rubble. The silence has returned to the upstate New York countryside. But David Miller knows the truth. The entity wasn't contained by the destruction of the house. It merely sought a new dwelling, a new cradle of despair. Sarah recovered physically, but she was never truly the same. She would sometimes hum a strange, childlike lullaby in her sleep, And sometimes when David looked into her eyes, he would see, just for a fleeting moment, that familiar, dark, mournful stare, because the most insidious monsters don't just inhabit houses. They inhabit us, and sometimes when the grief is too deep and the desire for solace too strong, the house comes home with you. Don't let the whispers in. Don't listen to the lullaby, because once it finds its way into your heart, it will always find its way out. Asterisk, asterisk.